If it matters to you, it matters to us. Call Tip today on 1-800-938-007.
Now, a little bit of housekeeping due to essential maintenance. There may be some slight disruption to our transmission signal in South Tipperary from about 12 noon today until 2 o'clock. So if that is the case, apologies about that. Years ago in RTE, they'd say, it's Dunalin on Bristol Show, which sort of covered a multitude. I'm delighted to be joined in the studio now with John G. O'Dwyer, and we continue with the story of Ireland, I suppose, and this is the second slot. John, how are you?
I'm delighted. Great to be back again.
Good to see you. St. Patrick, John. Yeah, we're going to talk about St. Patrick today.
Well, I suppose he's not really the avuncular figure we think about. So if we're going to start shooting sacred cows, we can say one thing for certain. St. Patrick did not bring Christianity to Ireland. He was not the first person. The reason is the Pope sent in a fella in 431 called Palladius. And Palladius's job was, he could convert people to Christianity, fine. But his main job was to administer to the existing Christians in Ireland. So that tells us there were Christians in Ireland in 431. Patrick didn't come until 432. We know that for definite. There's also a possibility, for example, if we go down to Waterford, the people down there would say St. Declan would have preceded for Patrick as well in Ireland. There would have been St. Kieran of Sagar and that. And that's not surprising, because remember, Christianity, the Roman Empire had legalized Christianity 120 years earlier, and it was the official and only religion of the Roman Empire 50 years before St. Patrick came here. We were trading with the Roman Empire, so the idea that Patrick was the first Christian or brought this completely new idea into Ireland, that's preposterous. He didn't bring Christianity into Ireland. Among others, he probably had a huge influence, particularly in the northern half of the country. We have his own writings when he came into Ireland, but it's nothing like the avuncular figure. In other words, Patrick's own writings are exactly what you'd expect of a disruptor coming in. Remember, at that stage, the real power was held by the Druids, and they controlled religion, they controlled everything else within society, the legal system, the whole lot. They wouldn't have liked Patrick coming in. And his own words, which is, Patrick says that he was beaten, put in chains and imprisoned and tried as well as that in his time in Ireland. The amazing thing at all in what
Sorry, now, was that his first time in Ireland?
Second time in Ireland.
Second
when
time
he came back, yes. In fact, he landed at Wicklow, and he admits that the local people wouldn't let him land. So he went further up to Saul, and therefore, there was a local chieftain there who welcomed him. Maybe he knew about Christianity already. It was a very, very difficult mission for Patrick. And I suppose the one thing you survived, that he actually came in as such a disruptor, and he survived. Now, the one thing may be that there were Christians in Ireland already, so people were aware of it. So that may have, as I say, softened up the playing pitch for him a little bit. People at least knew what he was talking about.
But what we learned in school, he was a slave here at one stage, was he?
Yes, he says that in his own writings. He says that in his own, so we have to take that, that's what he was.
And then he went back, was it to Wales?
He went back, and nobody knows where exactly he was born, somewhere in Britain. The historians are fighting over it. Was it up in Northumbria? Was it in Wales? But in some way he was British, and then he went on, studied in the Catholic Church, became a bishop, and then in a dream he had the Irish people signalling him to come back to Ireland as a missionary, and he responded to that. That's what he says in his own writing.
Okay. Well, what comes from the writing? I mean, in terms of his character and the kind of person he was, was he tough? Was he...
I'd say what comes across, I think, is that he was like you and me, full of insecurities, struggling to make sense of life, and a very humble person. Very humble, seeing himself as God's servant, that kind of thing, but finding it very difficult, and very difficult to fulfill his mission as well. So this whole idea that we have built up, that everything was hunky-dory, and he came in and he drove the snakes out of Ireland. There were no snakes in Ireland ever.
So that was a metaphor of some sort?
Yes, it's a metaphor, they say, for, it is said, I imagine everything is a metaphor. It's the idea of driving evil out of Ireland. That's exactly it. But that he went around and all the kids came out to meet him. Like, there was no towns in Ireland. There was maybe 1,500 small settlements around the country. Travelling from one to the other would have been dangerous. You would have wolves roaming around the place. You could be attacked. So it was a very, very difficult mission. And, after a good lot of rain like we've had now, how do you cross the River Shannon safely if you get to the River Shannon? All those problems are not, you just see him come in a lovely sunny day and that, not the way it was.
Right, but he was very effective.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I think the point about it is the Christian message is an extremely effective one. And we talked about that. It had a huge selling point. And this was the idea of the hereafter, where we would meet loved ones in heaven. Now, in the past, the pagans had maybe some idea that people would in some way come back and be reincarnated as somebody else. This kind of thing, maybe some spirit, some idea of your spirit staying on. But this idea of the whole person, that, you would meet a loved one when you were back up in heaven. It's such a powerful message. He had that powerful message in behind him. But the other thing you would remember, if he was 6 years in Ireland, he also spoke Irish. So that would have been, whereas poor old Palladius only lasted here a year, probably spoke Latin, couldn't communicate with the local people. You have to think of all the practicalities as well.
The Shamrock.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, I wouldn't say there's no evidence, no historical evidence whatsoever for that either.
Are you serious?
None at all, yeah.
The symbol of the
but
Trinity.
It's a very bad example anyway. It's a very bad metaphor, because the three people are part of the Shamrock, but the idea of God is that each leaf would be God whole. Each one of them is fully God himself. Each leaf is only part of the Shamrock. So the idea is that everybody is fully and entirely God, fully entirely the Shamrock. So all of those things were built up. But remember, what happened later on
were they imposed later on onto the myths?
They would have been, yes,
Patrick?
mostly. I mean,
okay.
We have no evidence, there's no evidence whatsoever to believe any of those things. They were imposed later on because Armagh became very powerful in the church. And the whole idea was to promote Patrick, the first Bishop of Armagh, as the entire 100% founder of the Irish Church. Therefore then, because he set up his seat in Armagh, you couldn't say, no, I don't think it's a good idea. Armagh is kind of a small place. Really, it's the Bishop of Dublin, or indeed the Bishop of Cork, or wherever. So they were promoting themselves. The Northern Church became very... So you can see the reason why they would have wanted to do that. And all these then are what you call hagiologies, where these people are built up. They're not a bit like you and me. They have no human frailties whatsoever. And of course, nobody can be like that.
Tipperary angle on this then?
Yeah, well, comes the Rock of Cashel, of course, and coming to Angus. Again, that's the whole idea that the most powerful person saw the Christian message. Therefore, the Christian message is so absolutely powerful. But if we talk about it then, it's more important than what happened. It's the legacy that Patrick left behind him. That's the main thing. And the first thing that came in here was monasticism. So Ireland became a uniquely monastic country with monasteries everywhere in the way Europe didn't. And so you have the founding of places like Clonmacnoise, Glendalough, St. Finbar down in Gugan Barra, Clonard in County Meath, Bangor up in the north, near where St. Patrick had his ministry. And people went out there. And the important thing was then that the thing is, we have to think of Ireland as now not very stable, but a relative place of stability, whereas the rest of Europe is what's called the Dark Ages, when the Huns and the Vandals were coming in, the Roman Empire was breaking up, so all the old certainties were breaking down. And so once Christianity came to Ireland, then a lot of missionaries felt they should bring back Christianity. Now, the important thing to remember is the idea Christianity did not die out on the continent when the Huns and the Vandals came in. It was in one place, it wouldn't be in another. There would have been, wars and that kind of thing. But it's very unstable. But you got then the likes of Columba, who went up to Iona, Columbanus, who went the whole way down to Bobbio in Italy. But again, you get the hagiologies. And the point is, when he went to France, he wasn't welcomed because there was a local bishop there who didn't like the whole idea. So that's why he went to Italy, because he got kicked out of there. St. Kilian got his head chopped off in Würzburg. So, it's not as simple to bring in messages like that. The things that are happening in the world today, the same impulses were there among people back then. So, but what you had in Ireland then, you had all these people going out, St. Brendan as well going out, and they were all in St. Aidan over to Lindisfarne. You had an enormous number of people. But with relative stability in Ireland, see, to be creative, if you want to be creative, you can't really be creative if you're worried, will you be alive tomorrow? You know, will you have a dinner tomorrow? But Ireland was relatively stable compared with Europe, and so it allowed a great flourishing of Christianity. So that's where we get back then. The great artefacts, the Ardagh chalice, the Tardagh brooch, the Cross of Cong, and of course the one here, you want the Tipperary angle, the Derry na Flan chalice. Nothing remotely like that was produced at the time anywhere in Europe. And because these people had support in the community, and because the monasteries were seen as a sanctuary, so even though the Irish were often warring, they would not attack the monasteries. They were seen as Christian. And of course that was all then to be rudely interrupted pretty quickly. But those are the big things. And then of course you had the writing as well, the Book of Kells, the Book of Dodder, all this great flowering, and it's very, nothing like that could have happened in Europe. So I always think the Irish are a very creative race, and I think that creativity was there. And why were the Irish poor then? I think they didn't fit into structured environments as well, like with the Industrial Revolution when you were on an assembly line. But when it came to creating, and then it came back to IT again, that's all about creativity as well.
Interesting. And when you say this was all interrupted, are you talking about the Vikings then?
Yes, the Vikings came in. So there was this beautiful thing then, and the Vikings came in, and they were seen as barbarians. And the main reason they were seen as barbarians was that they were attacking the monasteries, and monasteries were seen as sanctuaries. So they came in. So what would happen is, it would only happen in summer. They'd only travel, obviously, in summer. These lads would arrive in and they would attack the monasteries. They were the only things worth attacking in Ireland. Remember, there was no cities and there was only scattered farmsteads. So they started attacking the monasteries, picked the low-hanging fruit first, Lambay Island, Rathlin Island and so forth. Then, as we'd say down in Tipperary, getting a bit bolder. So they go up as far as Limerick, they go up the rivers. And eventually then, and then they go back with their loot to Norway.
Well, in the meantime, the monks, they were hiding their precious stuff as well, weren't they?
Possibly why the Derry na Flan chalice was possibly there was Vikings, because probably it's quite unlikely that the Irish would see sanctuary. So even though they were attacking each other, they probably wouldn't have attacked the monastery. Yes. So it's very, very. So they were trying to hide. Of course, from the terror of the Norsemen, that was a prayer, "May the Lord deliver us." But again, eventually, the monasteries are sacked. So what are you going to do now? I mean, okay. And what is that? It's kind of a long journey, dangerous journey back to Norway. What about kind of
settling down
here?
Yeah.
So they started to settle down, and they began then to spend time here.
They started to build.
Yeah, and they started to build.
Yeah.
So they created trading posts. They created those at the mouth of the great rivers. So you have Dublin, you have Wexford, you have Waterford, you have Cork, you have Limerick. They were all created. Now, not a lot of those cities remain. That's why we don't know as much about the Vikings, because they were all wooden. They built of wood. Whereas you go back 3,000 years before that to the Stone Age, you have something built of stone, which of course will last, like Newgrange. So they began to trade, and then after a while you settle down, you get to know the local people, you start to like them, maybe you start to fall in love with them.
Sure.
They begin to intermarry, and then they begin to become Christian, and everybody's better off because now they're trading. They are great traders, so everything begins to settle down, and it's going along reasonably well then, until then a fellow called Brian Boru comes along.
And tell us about Brian Boru.
Brian Boru, yeah. Well, the first thing is, I presume you were taught in school that the Brian Boru went up to Dublin. At the Battle of Clare, he drove the Vikings out of Ireland, and he became High King of Ireland. He didn't. After the battle, the Vikings went back into Dublin. Brian didn't go home because he was dead. In fact, not only would I say that he didn't drive the Vikings out, it could be argued that he actually lost the battle, because he died, his son died, and his grandson died, and they were the heirs apparent, with the result that Mael Seachtain O'Neill was able to usurp the High Kingship of Ireland in the power vacuum. So the O'Briens lost the High Kingship of Ireland there. They didn't drive the Vikings out of Ireland. In fact, the nearest thing I'd say modern historians would say is that the Battle of Clontarf was a civil war. Brian was the High King of Ireland, was pushing people around, or that's what they felt. So the King of Leinster tied up with the Cedric Selkenbeard in Dublin, and they decided they would take on Brian's power, and that's what it led to. There were Vikings of Dublin were certainly on the side of the King of Leinster, but the Vikings in Waterford, Cork and Limerick were on the side of Brian. It was very much it was like the much later Civil War, I think, between the Free State soldiers and the Republicans, who would be top dog in Ireland. And Brian won it, but then didn't survive to go on long enough. So
I'm conscious of what we were taught. I mean, my understanding was that Brian Brew had won the battle and just was unfortunate in the aftermath of it, he was murdered.
Yeah, well, yes. The Vikings retreated back into Dublin, but then they just went on. So Brian was dead. Cedric Silkenbeard, his main adversary there, he continued on as the King of Dublin for another 22 years after that. So, like, all these outcomes are all as clear, and we still have lots of Vikings and Viking names around Ireland. The name Doyle is Donegal, which is because they were that's what the Vikings were referred to in Ireland. So a huge amount of heritage, and they kind of all absorbed into it. But you know, in history, especially older history is messy, and some of the old historians try to put it's easier to sell a clear message. Patrick came into Ireland, converted all the Irish, did a whole lot himself. Brian Boru came up to Dublin, drove the Vikings out of Ireland. Unfortunately, he got killed there. But history is always more messy than that, and people have all kinds of relationships, all kinds of motivations.
We've been teaching it arseways then, because it's much more exciting and passionate with the way that you're portraying it. I mean,
the main thing, these are all real people with the same thing, so they're all trying to protect their own ground. So if you move this forward, it's the same motivation. I don't agree with it, but Israel's response in Gaza is because they were somebody attacked their ground, got in there into when their back was turned, and killed lots of their people, and that's the result. That's the ferocious response from that you have there. But unfortunately, deep down within us all, there is that gene which must be kept controlled, and sometimes it's let free, and then the most horrendous things will happen in history. But everything kind of settled down, after that.
Right, so we're up as far as Brian Boru then.
Yeah.
Next time round, what are we going to do? Where are we going to take
what we're going to do then is I'm going to throw in another teaser here. You have this fella Dermot McMurray.
Sure.
He's really evil. Yeah. So everybody we were taught in Ireland, he was the first guy to he went out and he invited the Normans into Ireland. I'm going to tell you it is true, but before that, a guy invited the Normans into Ireland well before Dermot McMurray, about 15 years before, and that was the Pope.
Wow.
He gave a laudability to Henry II, and he said, you can take over Ireland. And it was all, you see, it's the human thing again. It was really a dispute that the Celtic Church wasn't paying its dues properly to Rome, wasn't following the proper doctrine, and the Pope was very worried about that, and he wanted to change that around. So he gave a laudability to Henry. Now, Henry was fighting in France and everything else and never got around to it. So what actually happened then was, when Dermot McMurray went abroad, he looked for support from Henry, didn't get it, but a very ambitious lord called the Earl of Pembroke, Strongbow, came into Ireland, and suddenly Henry began to look out, because he saw Strongbow as setting up his own kingdom in Ireland, and he was in like a flash of lightning to make sure that
it's fascinating. Who was the Pope? That wasn't Celestine, was it? No, no, that was earlier, wasn't it?
It was. No, Celestine was earlier. I just can't think of the Pope's name now.
Right. Okay. So next time round, it's fabulous stuff. In fact, from last time, we can't believe the amount of traction we're getting on in terms of people engaging with us over. So it's really, really good indeed. Pleasure as always. Thanks, John, and a happy Christmas to you and yours as well. Thank you. That's it for me. Leanne produced, Ali looks after content, Stephen has the time tunnel on the lunchtime show, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Tip FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie.
Please support